In a small, crumbling apartment on the outskirts of the city, life was anything but easy for a young mother named Maria. She lived with her baby boy, Lucas, in a place that barely deserved to be called home. The walls were stained with dampness, and the cold draft seeped through cracks in the windows no matter how tightly she tried to seal them. It was a struggle every single day, but Maria never gave up, because giving up meant letting down the one person who mattered most: her son. Maria wasn't always like this. Once upon a time, she had dreams. She wanted to finish school, get a good job, maybe even travel someday. But life had other plans. When she found out she was pregnant at just 22, her world turned upside down. The father of her child disappeared before Lucas was even born, leaving her alone to face the harsh realities of motherhood without support. Her family was far away, too caught up in their own struggles to help. And friends? Well, true friends were hard to come by when you spent most of your time working odd jobs just to put food on the table. Every morning, Maria woke up exhausted. She worked long hours cleaning houses, washing cars, or doing whatever odd job she could find. Some days she'd walk miles under the scorching sun to save money on bus fare, carrying Lucas in a sling across her chest. People often looked at her with pity, but Maria didn't want anyone's sympathy. All she wanted was enough to feed her baby and keep a roof over their heads. Yet no matter how hard she tried, it never seemed to be enough. Winter was approaching, and things were getting worse. The landlord had started knocking on her door more frequently, demanding overdue rent. The cupboards were almost empty, and there were nights when Maria went to bed hungry so Lucas could have the last bit of milk or bread. She hated seeing the worry in his tiny eyes when he cried from hunger. He was too little to understand why. Mommy couldn't always make things better, and that broke her heart more than anything else. One particularly cold evening, after another grueling day of work, Maria sat on the edge of her bed, staring at Lucas as he slept fitfully in his crib. His cheeks were pale and his breathing sounded raspy. She knew he needed proper nutrition, warm clothes, and medicine if he was going to grow strong. But how could she provide those things when she couldn't even afford basic necessities? Tears streamed down her face as she buried her head in her hands. For the first time in a long while, she felt completely helpless. Desperation can drive people to do things they never imagined themselves capable of. That night, Maria made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life, but also change it forever. She picked up her phone and scrolled through social media, searching for something, anything, that might offer a solution. And then, she saw it, an ad posted by a wealthy man looking for companionship. It wasn't explicit about what kind of companionship he sought, but the underlying message was clear. Maria hesitated, her stomach churning with guilt and shame. Was she really considering this? Selling herself? For money? But as she looked over at Lucas, shivering slightly in his thin blanket, her resolve hardened. She told herself it was only temporary, just until she got back on her feet. She typed out a message to the number listed in the ad, offering herself not just as company but as someone willing to do whatever it took. Her fingers trembled as she hit send, and immediately, regret washed over her. What had she done? Who was this man? Would he hurt her, use her, or worse, report her to the authorities? The next morning, Maria received a reply. The man agreed to meet her later that day. As she read his brief response, panic set in. How could she go through with this? What if Lucas grew up knowing what his mother had done? But then again, what choice did she have? Turning back wasn't an option, not when her baby's life depended on her making sacrifices. She spent the rest of the day preparing, trying to look presentable despite her exhaustion. She borrowed a dress from a neighbor, pinned her unruly hair into a neat bun, and scrubbed her face clean. Every step felt like walking toward a cliff, knowing full well she might fall. When the time came, she kissed Lucas goodbye, promising him silently that she'd come back with whatever it took to give him a better life. Then, clutching her purse tightly, she stepped out into the biting cold and headed toward the address he'd given her. As she approached the building, a sleek high-rise towering above the city skyline, her heart pounded in her chest. There was no turning back now. Taking a deep breath, she entered the lobby, feeling out of place among the polished marble floors and elegant decor. The elevator ride to the penthouse felt endless, each ding of the passing floors echoing in her ears like a countdown to doom. When she finally reached the top and knocked on the door, it opened to reveal a tall, well-dressed man in his early 40s. His piercing eyes studied her for a moment, taking in her tired expression and trembling hands. "Come in," he said simply, stepping aside to let her enter. Maria followed him inside, her mind racing with questions. Why was he helping her? What did he want in return? And most importantly, could she trust him? Little did she know, this encounter would mark the beginning of a journey neither of them could have predicted, one that would test their strength, challenge their beliefs, and ultimately lead them both to a place neither thought possible: love. The penthouse was unlike anything Maria had ever seen before. The moment she stepped inside, her breath caught in her throat. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city skyline, twinkling with lights as evening fell. The furniture was sleek and modern, every detail carefully chosen to exude luxury. It felt like stepping into a different world, one where people didn't worry about rent or whether there would be food on the table tomorrow. But none of that mattered to Maria right now. Her heart was pounding so loudly she could barely hear herself think. She clutched her purse tightly, her knuckles turning white as she tried to steady her breathing. This wasn't supposed to feel real. In her mind, she had imagined this meeting being quick, transactional, something dirty and painful that she'd have to endure for Lucas's sake. Instead, the man who greeted her seemed calm, almost kind. He gestured toward a plush couch near the window. "Sit," he said softly, his voice warm but firm. Maria hesitated for a second before sinking onto the edge of the cushion, perching stiffly like a bird ready to take flight at any moment. She kept her eyes downcast, too afraid to meet his gaze directly. What must he think of her? Did he see her desperation written all over her face? The man disappeared into what looked like a kitchen area and returned moments later holding 2 steaming cups of tea. He placed one gently on the coffee table in front of her, though Maria made no move to touch it. "Drink if you want," he said, sitting across from her. His tone was gentle, almost soothing, but it only made her more uneasy. Why was he being so nice? Shouldn't he just get straight to the point? For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Maria stared at the cup of tea, watching wisps of steam curl upward. Finally, the silence became unbearable. "Why are you here?" the man asked suddenly, breaking the tension. His question was blunt, cutting through the awkwardness without a trace of judgment. Maria froze, caught off guard by how straightforward he was. She opened her mouth to answer but found her voice stuck in her throat. How could she explain herself without sounding pathetic, without revealing just how desperate she truly was? But then she remembered why she was here, for Lucas, for her baby boy who deserved better than the life she was giving him. Summoning every ounce of courage she had left, she began to speak. "I'm here because I need help," she admitted, her voice trembling. Tears welled up in her eyes, blurring the room around her. "I don't have anyone else to turn to. My son, he's hungry, he's cold, and I can't give him what he needs. I thought maybe." Her words trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. To her surprise, the man didn't interrupt or mock her. He simply listened, his expression softening as she poured out her story. She told him everything. The endless days working odd jobs, the nights spent crying herself to sleep, the fear of losing her home and not knowing where they'd go next. She even confessed how scared she was of failing Lucas, of letting him down when he needed her most. By the time she finished, tears were streaming freely down her cheeks and she felt completely exposed, stripped bare of all pretense. When she finally stopped talking, the room fell silent again. Maria braced herself for pity, disgust, maybe even anger. But instead, the man leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. "You're not selling yourself to me tonight," he said firmly, his voice carrying a weight that startled her. Maria blinked, unsure if she'd heard him correctly. "What do you mean?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I mean exactly what I said," he replied, his gaze unwavering. "You came here thinking I wanted something from you, but I don't. Not like that." Her head spun with confusion. If he didn't want what she assumed he did, then why had he agreed to meet her? Why bring her here? Offer her tea? Listen to her story? Was this some kind of game, a test, or worse, was he planning to call the authorities and report her? "Then why did you agree to see me?" she asked, her voice rising slightly despite her effort to stay calm. "If you didn't need whatever you thought I was offering." The man sighed, leaning back against the couch. For the first time since she arrived, he looked uncertain, as though searching for the right words. "Because sometimes," he said slowly, "people need help, not judgment. And because I've been where you are. Alone, desperate, feeling like there's no way out." His words hit Maria like a punch to the chest. She hadn't expected empathy, let alone understanding. Most people would have turned away, dismissed her as someone who made bad choices or deserved her fate. But this man, this stranger, was choosing to see her humanity instead of her flaws. It was disarming, almost overwhelming. Still, doubt lingered in her mind. "Help?" she echoed, shaking her head. "You barely know me. Why would you help me?" He smiled faintly, though there was sadness behind it. "Let's just say I've learned that helping others is sometimes the only way to save ourselves." They talked for a while longer, though Maria struggled to process everything he said. He asked questions about Lucas, about her hopes and dreams, for him about what she needed most right now. She answered honestly, surprised by how easy it was to open up to him. There was something about his presence, calm, patient, non-judgmental, that made her feel safe in a way she hadn't felt in years. By the time she left the penthouse that night, Maria's head was spinning with conflicting emotions. Relief, gratitude, suspicion. They all swirled together, leaving her unsure of what to believe. The man had promised to reach out soon, to see how he could assist her. Whether it was genuine or not, she couldn't tell yet. All she knew was that, for the first time in months, she allowed herself to hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. As she walked back to her apartment under the dim glow of streetlights, clutching the coat he'd lent her. To keep warm, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter might change her life forever. She didn't know how, or even why. But deep down, she sensed that something extraordinary was beginning. The days following that strange and unforgettable meeting in the penthouse were a blur for Maria. She couldn't stop thinking about the man who had listened to her story without judgment, who had offered help when she least expected it. At first, she tried to convince herself it was too good to be true. People like him didn't exist in her world. People with money, power, and kindness all rolled into one. Surely there had to be a catch, some hidden agenda waiting to reveal itself. But then, 2 days later, her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from him. "I've arranged an interview for you at a cafe I own." The message read, "It's nothing fancy, but the job pays well and you'll have flexible hours, so you can take care of your son." Maria stared at the screen, her heart racing. Was this real? Could she really trust him? She replied hesitantly, thanking him but also asking why he was doing this. His response came quickly. "Because everyone deserves a chance. Show up tomorrow at 10 a.m. and we'll talk more then." Maria spent the rest of the day torn between excitement and fear. On one hand, the idea of having a stable job again filled her with hope. Maybe this was the break she needed to finally get back on her feet. On the other hand, she couldn't shake the feeling that something would go wrong, that he'd change his mind or demand something in return later. But what choice did she have? She couldn't pass up this opportunity, not when Lucas depended on her. The next morning, Maria dressed carefully, choosing her cleanest clothes and brushing her hair until it shone. She wanted to look presentable, professional, like someone worthy of being given a second chance. With Lucas safely tucked away at a neighbor's house for the afternoon, she made her way to the cafe. It was nestled in a quiet corner of the city, its cozy interior inviting and warm. The smell of freshly brewed coffee wafted through the air as she stepped inside. He was already there, standing behind the counter talking to one of the staff members. When he saw her, he smiled warmly and gestured for her to come closer. "This is Maria," he said to the woman beside him. "She'll be joining us as part of the team. Please show her the ropes." Maria blinked, stunned by how casually he introduced her, as if she belonged here, as if she'd always been meant to work in this charming little cafe. For the first time in months, she felt a flicker of pride. Maybe she could do this. Maybe she could start over. Over the next few weeks, Maria threw herself into her new role. She learned how to make lattes, bake pastries, and handle customers with patience and grace. The staff welcomed her warmly, and even though she still felt out of place sometimes, she began to believe she might actually fit in here. Best of all, the pay was enough to cover rent and groceries, with a little left over for Lucas's needs. Slowly but surely, life started to feel manageable again. And then there was him, the man who had changed everything. He visited the cafe often, always bringing small gifts for Lucas or checking in on Maria to see how she was adjusting. At first, she was wary of his presence, unsure of what he expected in return. But as time went on, she realized he genuinely cared. He wasn't trying to control her or manipulate her. He simply wanted to help. One evening, after closing up the cafe, Maria found herself sitting across from him at a table near the window. They'd fallen into a habit of chatting casually, whenever they crossed paths, and tonight was no different. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked suddenly, voicing the question that had been nagging at her since their first meeting. He paused, swirling the last sip of his tea thoughtfully before answering. "Do you remember what I told you that night in my apartment? About how helping others is sometimes the only way to save ourselves?" Maria nodded, recalling his words vividly. "Yes, but what does that mean? Who are you saving?" A shadow passed over his face, and for a moment he looked older, wearier. "My wife passed away a few years ago," he admitted quietly. "We were happy once, but after she died, I shut everyone out. I buried myself in work, convinced I didn't need anyone else. And then I met you. Seeing your strength, your love for your son, it reminded me of what it means to care about someone other than yourself. You gave me purpose again, whether you realize it or not." Tears welled up in Maria's eyes as she listened. She hadn't known about his loss, hadn't understood the depth of his pain. But now, hearing him speak so openly, she felt a connection forming between them, a bond forged from shared struggles and mutual understanding. "I don't know what to say," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you doesn't feel like enough." "You don't owe me anything," he replied firmly. "Just promise me one thing, don't give up. Keep fighting for yourself and your son, that's all I ask." As the weeks turned into months, their relationship continued to evolve. What started as gratitude grew into something deeper, something neither of them had anticipated. Maria admired his generosity, his quiet strength, and the way he treated Lucas like his own child. In turn, he marveled at her resilience, her unwavering devotion to her son, and the warmth she brought into his otherwise lonely life. There were moments when doubt crept in, especially for Maria. She worried that accepting his help made her indebted to him in ways she didn't fully understand. Was she replacing one kind of dependency with another? But every time those fears surfaced, he reassured her. "I'm not here to own you," he'd say. "I'm here because I believe in you." By the end of the year, Maria had settled into a rhythm she hadn't thought possible. She had a steady income, a safe place to live, and a growing sense of confidence. Most importantly, she had someone she could rely on, not just financially, but emotionally. Someone who saw her not as a struggling mother or a charity case, but as a person worthy of love and respect. One chilly December evening, as snowflakes began to drift lazily from the sky, Maria stood outside the cafe watching Lucas play with a toy car the man had bought him. He stood beside her, his hands shoved into his coat pockets as he gazed at the boy with a soft smile. "You've done an amazing job with him," he said after a while. "He's lucky to have you." Maria glanced at him, her chest swelling with affection. "And we're lucky to have you," she replied softly. In that moment, surrounded by the quiet hum of the city and the promise of brighter days ahead, Maria realized something profound. Love wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It was about showing up, staying steady, and believing in each other even when the odds seemed insurmountable. And somehow, against all odds, they had found that together. As the months rolled by, Maria and the man who had changed her life grew closer in ways neither of them had anticipated. At first, their connection was built on gratitude. Maria's appreciation for his kindness and his admiration for her strength as a mother. But over time, it blossomed into something deeper, something that neither could ignore. It wasn't love at first sight or some grand romantic gesture. It was quieter than that, more real. It was the kind of bond that grows when two people share their pain, their hopes, and their dreams with each other. One evening, after a long day at the cafe, Maria sat across from him in the cozy living room of his penthouse. Lucas was asleep upstairs, tucked safely into bed with a stuffed bear the man had given him. The apartment was warm and inviting, filled with the soft glow of lamps and the faint hum of city traffic outside. They were alone now, just the two of them, sipping tea and talking about everything and nothing. It was one of those rare moments where the world felt still, like they existed in their own little bubble far away from all the struggles they'd faced. "You've done so much for us," Maria said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. Her voice was soft but carried a weight she couldn't quite hide. "I don't know how to thank you." He looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "You don't need to thank me," he replied simply. "But if you really want to understand why I've done all this, maybe you should ask yourself why you care so much." Maria frowned, unsure what he meant. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he continued, leaning forward slightly, "why does any of this matter to you? Why are you willing to work so hard, sacrifice so much for your son? What drives you?" She hesitated, taken aback by the question. No one had ever asked her that before. Not like this. Not in a way that made her stop and think. She stared down at her hands, twisting the hem of her sweater nervously. "Because," she began slowly, searching for the right words. "Because Lucas is my whole world. He's the reason I get up every morning, even when things feel impossible. I want him to have a better life than I did. I want him to grow up knowing he's loved, no matter what." Her voice cracked slightly on the last sentence, and tears welled up in her eyes. She quickly wiped them away, embarrassed by her vulnerability. But instead of looking away, the man reached out and gently took her hand in his. His touch was warm, grounding, and somehow exactly what she needed in that moment. "That's why I care too," he said softly. "Not just about Lucas, but about you. You remind me of what it means to fight for someone, to put everything aside for the people you love. That's something I lost after my wife passed away, but seeing you, it brought it back." Maria's breath caught in her throat as she looked into his eyes. There was so much honesty there, so much raw emotion. For the first time, she saw him not just as the man who had saved her family, but as someone who was healing alongside her, someone who had been broken and was learning to piece himself back together again. "I didn't think anyone would ever see me like that," she admitted quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Like I'm worth fighting for." "You are," he said firmly, squeezing her hand. "And don't let anyone tell you otherwise." That night marked a turning point in their relationship. From then on, they stopped pretending they were just friends or benefactor and beneficiary. They allowed themselves to lean on each other, to find comfort in each other's presence. It wasn't always easy. There were still moments of doubt, of fear that they might lose what they had built. But they faced them together. Over the next few months, their bond deepened even further. The man started spending more time at Maria's apartment, helping her with chores, playing with Lucas, and teaching him simple games. To Lucas, he became a constant figure, a source of laughter and affection. On weekends, they'd take trips to the park or visit local markets, exploring the city as a makeshift family. Maria cherished these moments, watching Lucas run ahead of them, giggling as he chased pigeons or pointed excitedly at colorful balloons. For Maria, falling in love with him felt natural, almost inevitable. It wasn't about fireworks or dramatic declarations. It was about the quiet, everyday acts of kindness that added up over time. It was the way he remembered Lucas's favorite snacks or how he always knew when she was feeling overwhelmed and needed a break. It was the way he listened without judgment, offering advice only when she asked for it. And most importantly, it was the way he respected her independence, never making her feel like she owed him anything. But despite the growing closeness between them, Maria still wrestled with guilt. She worried that accepting his help, and now his love, made her weak, like she couldn't stand on her own 2 feet. One night, as they sat together on her couch after putting Lucas to bed, she finally voiced her fears. "Do you ever think I'm using you?" she blurted out, surprising even herself. "Like I came to you because I needed help, and now I feel like I can't repay you." He turned to look at her, his brow furrowed in concern. "Is that what you think?" he asked gently. "That you're using me?" She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I don't want you to think I'm staying with you because of what you've done for us. I don't want you to think I'm ungrateful or taking advantage." He sighed, pulling her closer until she rested her head on his shoulder. "Listen to me," he said firmly. "Love isn't a transaction. It's not about keeping score or paying someone back. If anything, I'm the one who's grateful for meeting you, for having you and Lucas in my life. You've reminded me what it means to truly care about someone else." His words washed over her like a balm, soothing the doubts that had plagued her for so long. She realized then that love wasn't about being perfect or having everything figured out. It was about showing up day after day and choosing to stand beside someone no matter what. By spring, their little family had settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal. Maria worked at the cafe during the day, while the man handled business, meetings and projects from home. In the evenings, they cooked dinner together, laughed over silly stories, and marveled at how quickly Lucas was growing. Life wasn't without its challenges. They still faced bills, occasional disagreements, and the lingering scars of past hardships, but they faced them together. One sunny afternoon, as they strolled through the park with Lucas running ahead of them, Maria felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. Watching the man laugh as Lucas tugged on his sleeve, begging him to chase after a butterfly, she realized something profound. Love wasn't about finding someone who completed you. It was about finding someone who stood beside you, flaws and all, and helped you become the best version of yourself. And as she reached for his hand, intertwining her fingers with his, she knew they had found that in each other. It was a crisp autumn morning when Maria stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the simple white dress she had borrowed from a friend. Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed out the fabric, her reflection staring back at her with wide, tearful eyes. Today was the day she never thought would come after everything she'd been through. A year ago, she was a struggling single mother on the brink of despair, unsure if she could even survive another week. Now she was about to marry the man who had changed her life in ways she couldn't have imagined. Lucas sat nearby on the floor, playing with a toy car, completely oblivious to the significance of the occasion. He looked adorable in his tiny suit, giggling as he pushed the car across the carpet. Every now and then he'd glance up at Maria and say, "Mama, pretty." His innocent words brought a smile to her face, even though her heart was pounding. With nerves and excitement, the man, now her fiancé, was waiting outside, pacing nervously as guests began to arrive. They hadn't invited many people, just a handful of close friends and colleagues who had become like family over the past year. The ceremony was being held at the courthouse, a modest yet meaningful setting that reflected their journey together. It wasn't flashy or extravagant, but it didn't need to be. What mattered most was the love they shared and the promise they were about to make to each other. When Maria stepped outside, the man's breath caught in his throat. She looked radiant, glowing with happiness despite the challenges they had overcome to get here. As their eyes met, all the doubts and fears they had once carried seemed to fade away. This was real. This was love. The ceremony itself was short and sweet, filled with heartfelt vows and quiet laughter. When it came time to exchange rings, Maria's voice wavered as she promised to stand by him through thick and thin. "You saved us," she said softly, clutching his hand tightly. "But more than that, you believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to repay that kindness." He smiled, brushing a stray tear from her cheek. "You already have," he whispered. "Just by being here, by trusting me, by letting me be part of your life, that's all I ever wanted." After the official papers were signed and sealed, they walked out of the courthouse hand in hand, Lucas skipping happily beside them. The sun was shining brightly, casting golden light over the city streets. Friends cheered and clapped as they made their way to a nearby park for a small celebration. There were hugs, laughter, and plenty of stories shared about how far they had come. At one point during the gathering, the man stood up to speak. Holding a glass of sparkling cider, he cleared his throat and looked around at the smiling faces. "I want to thank everyone for being here today," he began, his voice steady but full of emotion. "But most of all, I want to thank Maria for trusting me, for teaching me what it means to truly care for someone, and for showing me that love isn't about perfection. It's about choosing to fight for each other no matter what." Maria blushed, lowering her head as the crowd erupted into applause. Later, when they cut the small cake and fed each other bites amidst playful teasing, she felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. This moment, this joy, was something she had fought so hard for, something she had almost given up on. As the afternoon turned into evening, the celebrations wound down, leaving the newlyweds alone with Lucas in their cozy apartment. The boy was fast asleep, curled up on the couch with his favorite blanket. Maria and the man sat side by side, watching him sleep peacefully. Neither spoke for a long time. There was no need. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with the unspoken understanding that they had built something extraordinary, together. "You know," Maria said finally, breaking the quiet, "there were days when I thought we'd never get here. Days when I felt like giving up." He nodded, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Me too," he admitted. "But somehow, we kept going. We found strength in each other even when we didn't think we had any left." She leaned her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "Do you think we'll always be this happy?" she asked softly, half joking but also curious. He chuckled, kissing the top of her head. "Life will throw challenges our way. I'm sure of that. But as long as we face them together, I think we'll be okay. Better than okay, actually." Maria smiled, feeling a sense of peace settle over her. She knew he was right. Their journey hadn't been easy, and it certainly wasn't over. There would still be bills to pay, arguments to resolve, and moments of doubt along the way. But they had proven time and again that they could weather anything as long as they had each other. Later that night, as they tucked Lucas into bed and turned off the lights, Maria paused in the doorway of his room, watching him sleep. She remembered the nights when he cried from hunger, when she lay awake wondering how she would provide for him. Those memories still lingered, but they no longer defined her. Instead, they served as reminders of how far they had come and how much they had achieved together. Back in their bedroom, Maria climbed into bed beside her husband. Calling him that felt strange but wonderful. He pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured sleepily. "Everything," she replied, snuggling closer. "How lucky we are. How much we've been through. And how grateful I am that you chose us." "I'm the lucky one," he whispered, kissing her forehead. "Don't forget that." As they drifted off to sleep, wrapped in each other's arms, Maria felt a deep sense of contentment. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. Love had brought them this far, and love would carry them through, whatever lay ahead. Together they had chosen hope over despair, trust over fear, and love over loneliness. And in doing so, they had created a family, a real, imperfect, beautiful family that nothing could break apart. Months passed after the wedding, and life settled into a rhythm that felt both new and familiar. Maria woke up every morning to the sound of Lucas's laughter echoing through the apartment. It was a small place, but it was theirs, a cozy home, filled with warmth and love. The man she now called her husband had moved in officially, bringing with him not just his belongings but also a sense of stability that Maria hadn't known in years. Together, they created routines, shared meals, and built memories that reminded them daily of how far they'd come. One crisp winter morning, as sunlight streamed through the frost-covered windows, Maria stood in the kitchen sipping a cup of coffee while her husband flipped pancakes on the stove. Lucas sat at the table, swinging his legs back and forth as he colored pictures in a worn-out coloring book. The scene was ordinary, almost mundane, but to Maria, it felt extraordinary. This was what she had dreamed of. A family, however imperfect, that loved and supported one another. "Do you remember when we first met?" her husband asked suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. He glanced over his shoulder at her, a teasing smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Maria chuckled, setting her mug down. "How could I forget? You were so serious, like you weren't sure what to do with me." "I wasn't," he admitted, flipping a pancake onto a plate. "I didn't expect someone like you, someone so strong, so determined, to walk into my life and turn everything upside down." She crossed her arms playfully. "Turned your life upside down? Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" He turned off the stove and walked over to her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "The best thing," he said softly, kissing her forehead. "You made me believe in second chances for myself and for others." Their playful banter faded into a quiet moment of reflection. Maria rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. She thought about all the struggles they had faced, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, the moments of doubt, and how they had overcome each obstacle together. Life wasn't perfect. There were still bills to pay, arguments to resolve, and days when exhaustion weighed heavily on them. But they faced it all side by side, never letting go of the bond they had forged. As the weeks went by, their little family continued to grow stronger. Lucas started preschool, his bright smile lighting up the room whenever he came home with stories about his friends and teachers. Maria watched proudly as he learned new things, his curiosity and energy infectious. Her husband often joined her, in these moments, marveling at how quickly their son was growing. "He's going to be taller than me one day," he joked, ruffling Lucas's hair affectionately. But life wasn't without its challenges. One evening, after putting Lucas to bed, Maria found herself sitting alone in the living room, staring at a stack of envelopes on the coffee table, bills, rent, groceries. Even with two incomes, money was tight, and some months felt harder than others. She sighed, rubbing her temples as stress crept in. Would they ever truly escape the shadow of financial insecurity? Her husband noticed her unease and sat beside her, placing a comforting hand on her knee. "What's wrong?" he asked gently. "It's nothing," she replied, forcing a smile. "Just thinking about bills again." He nodded, understanding immediately. Money had always been a sensitive topic between them, not because they argued about it, but because they both carried scars from past hardships. "We'll figure it out," he said firmly. "We always do." And they did. Whether it meant cutting back on luxuries, picking up extra shifts at work, or finding creative ways to stretch their budget, they tackled every challenge as a team. What mattered most wasn't the size of their bank account, but the strength of their partnership. They reminded themselves daily that love wasn't about having everything. It was about making the most of what they had. Spring arrived, bringing with it longer days and warmer weather. On weekends, the three of them would venture outside, exploring parks, visiting local markets, or simply taking long walks along tree-lined streets. These outings became cherished rituals, moments where they could step away from the hustle of everyday life and simply enjoy being together. One sunny afternoon, as they picnicked in a nearby park, Maria watched her husband chase Lucas across the grass, laughing as the boy tried to dodge his tickling fingers. She couldn't help but smile, feeling a deep sense of gratitude wash over her. This was happiness, real, tangible happiness. Not the kind you see in movies or read about in books, but the kind that comes from showing up for each other, day after day, through thick and thin. Later that evening, as they tucked Lucas into bed, Maria lingered in the doorway, watching him drift off to sleep. His tiny chest rose and fell steadily, his face peaceful and content. She remembered the nights when he cried from hunger, when she lay awake wondering if she could keep him safe. Those memories still lingered, but they no longer haunted her. Instead, they served as reminders of how much they had overcome and how resilient they had become. Back in their bedroom, Maria climbed into bed beside her husband. He was reading a book, his glasses perched on the edge of his nose. She leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever think about how different our lives are now?" she asked softly. He closed the book and removed his glasses, turning to look at her. "All the time," he replied. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm dreaming, if this is really real." "It's real," she assured him, taking his hand in hers. "We worked hard for this, we earned it." He smiled, squeezing her hand gently. "No, you earned it. You're the strongest person I know. I just got lucky enough to be part of your journey." Tears welled up in Maria's eyes, though she blinked them away quickly. "Stop saying things like that," she teased, nudging him playfully. "You're going to make me cry." They laughed softly, the sound filling the quiet room. For a moment, neither spoke, content to simply be in each other's presence. Outside, the city buzzed with life, but inside, everything felt calm and right. As they drifted off to sleep, wrapped in each other's arms, Maria reflected on the road they had traveled together. From the darkest days of desperation to the brightest moments of joy, their journey had been anything but easy, but it was worth every step, every sacrifice, every tear. Love had brought them here, not the fairy tale kind, but the messy, beautiful, real kind. And as long as they had each other, she knew they could face whatever the future held.